Okay, so welcome back. We are concluding the second chapter of Tanya, talking about the role or the portion of the parents and how they establish the level of the neshama that should be enclosed in the body of their child. So this is in continuation to what we explained before, that every single Jew has a holy soul whose essence, whose ingredients, if you want to call it, is godliness. And it doesn't really depend on a person's actions or behavior. Whoever you are, a Jew is a Jew is a Jew. And your Jewish soul is a portion of God above. Literally, it comes from Chachma Ilah, it comes from God's wisdom. It comes from the highest point of the highest world of Atzilut. And no matter what kind of Jew you are, a Jew is a Jew is a Jew. You have this special, unique, holy Jewish soul. Now, the Alter Rebbe adds that not only is the neshama itself something that, meaning the core, the essence of the neshama, not only is that given to a person regardless of his behavior, but even the rank of the neshama that's put into a person, and there's certainly very different varying ranks within souls. It's not so much dependent on the actions of the person down here, but rather it comes from above, because the soul ultimately transcends human behavior, and it therefore is not subject to the whims of human behavior. What that would indicate is that no matter what you do, your soul is not going to change. Or if you're talking about parents and children, no matter what the parents do, it's not going to change the soul of their children. But if you're a expert in the Zohar, you'll notice what seems to be a contradiction, and that is what the Alter Rebbe is coming to address over here. Uma shekosav b'Zohar, that which is stated in the Zohar, u'b'Zohar Chadash, and in Zohar Chadash literally means new Zohar, another section of the Zohar, sha'ikar talui she'ikadesh atmei b'shas tashmish tafka. That the main thing is that parents should sanctify themselves, elevate themselves to a holier state during intimacy. As we know that there's many books, for example, Reishis Chachma, and other sources that talk about the importance of the sanctity, of the holiness, of the union of husband and wife during intimacy, that this is a very holy time, it's a very special time, and it can impact the future of their children. So the Zohar says that parents should make this time very holy. However, not so is with the children of the simpletons. So basically, the Zohar is explaining the great necessity of a person to sanctify himself during intimacy, because that will draw down, as it says in the Zohar, nafshan kadishin, holy souls. So what would seem to be implied from this statement of the Zohar, that the rank of soul that is given to a child depends on the sanctity of that child's parents. So if the child's parents are doing the act of intimacy out of a state of holiness and understanding that this is a mitzvah that they're completing, that they're doing the will of God, and that they're here being partners with God in creating new life. So if that's their focus, and that, in other words, they're in a state of sanctity, then their child will be granted a higher soul. So which one is it? Do our actions have an impact on the level of soul, or do they not? So the Alter Rebbe explains that the Zohar is not saying that the level of the soul itself depends on the sanctity of the parents, but rather when the Zohar says holy souls, it's talking about the garments that are added to the soul. And here the Alter Rebbe explains it. Hainu, this means mishum she'ein lecha nefesh ruach neshama she'ein la lavush mi nefesh da'atzmus aviv v'imay. There is no nefesh, ruach, or neshama. Again, those are the three different ranks of the soul that does not have a garment from the soul of the essence of his father or mother. So, in what this referring to, the Arizal writes that in addition to the holy soul that's given to a person from heaven, the soul is also accompanied with a spiritual garment that is formed from the parents. And specifically by way of these garments, the garments are like the tools that through which the neshama is able to serve Hashem in the body. Now, why do you need garments? Because the neshama itself is completely spiritual. It's after all called a nefesh elokis, a godly soul. And contrast that with the body it's being put into, which is of course very physical. So the godly soul cannot have any impact, cannot relate to the body without this sort of garment of the soul. Now, what's a garment of a soul? So a garment of a soul is similar to a physical garment. On the one hand, what does a garment do? It covers the person who's wearing the garment. But on the other hand, a garment is the way a person expresses themselves. So it has this dual effect. On the one hand, it's hiding you. On the one hand, it's expressing you. So I'm wearing a shirt right now, right? The shirt is covering me. But what else is the shirt doing? Subconsciously, it conveys a certain message. I'm wearing a white button-down shirt, which means I'm probably not coming from the gym, right? It means whatever I'm doing right now, I probably consider as something serious and important, right? So garments convey a lot, right? But at the same time, they're also hiding. They're hiding my chest, right? So if a person is wearing an appropriate garment to who he or she is, that person is expressing their own characteristics, right? That's why a wealthy person, you're able to tell that he's wealthy. Again, there's always the exception to the rule, but at least there's a certain prototype or stereotype that a wealthy person can be, you can tell by their clothing or by the Rolex that they're wearing. He doesn't say Rolex over here, but you get the idea. So that's a physical garment. And then the same is true in a sense with the spiritual garment, that it allows the soul to express itself through the body. So on the one hand, the soul, the garment of the soul covers over the intensity of the holiness of the soul. However, on the flip side, it's not just concealing, it's not just hiding, it's enabling the soul to express itself, and it allows the soul to express itself into the body. Just like when I wear clothes, it allows me to be to enter into society, right? If I wasn't wearing clothes, the societal norm is that don't be around us. Get some clothes on, and then you can be a part of the crowd, right? And the same is true with the soul. In order for the soul to be a part of the crowd, so to speak, of the body, it has to have this garment which allows it to express itself. So, what does this have to do with the parents? So, one second, we're going to get there. And all the mitzvahs that a person does. Remember, who's doing the mitzvah? What's the essence of a Jew? Is the godly soul. But the soul is a soul. It's spiritual. It's not physical. So how does a spiritual soul do physical mitzvahs? They say, it does the mitzvahs through those garments. So in order for the soul to be able to do physical mitzvahs, to do actual commandments, it needs help. Because if it's a recycled soul, in other words, a reincarnated soul that was already once in this world and has to come back into a body in this physical world in order to rectify past sins. So then it says that those sins don't allow him to do mitzvahs, and he needs some help. But if it's a new soul, I'm not sure what that line means, but that's what that reads, all right. But if it's a new soul, in other words, a soul that never was here in a physical body, as it's known, the Baal Shem Tov said about the Alter Rebbe, the author of the Tanya, that he actually had a new soul. It was non-recycled, first time use. So if somebody has a new soul that never was in this world, then it also needs help because it's not used to dealing with this world. So in other words, either way you look at it, when a soul comes into a body, it needs help. If it's been here before, why are you coming back? You have a rap sheet. You have stuff to work on. You have a history of sins in your past life. Oh boy, we're gonna have to help you out over here. So the soul needs help. And if it's a brand new soul that's completely pure and innocent, then associating with this physical world is brand new territory, and it needs like a tour guide to take it around. So who's the tour guide? Who helps the soul navigate this world? That's the lavush. That's the garment. And the Alter Rebbe says further, even the nurture, even the sustenance that's given to the soul from above, hakol al yedei lavush zeh. It's all through this garment. So not only is the work and the effort and the toil that the soul does in this world done through this garment, but even the spiritual nurture that's given from heaven, which given from heaven implies not something you worked on, it's also given to the soul through this garment. So now going back to the effect of the parents being holy, sanctifying themselves, elevating themselves in the times of intimacy. So the Alter Rebbe says, and if he sanctifies himself, then he will draw down, he will elicit a holy garment for the soul of his child. Because since this garment is formed from the souls of the parents, so that means that the level of the garment, of how spiritually attuned or whatever that garment might be, depends on the level of the parents. And if you want this garment to be pure and clean, then the father has to sanctify himself, because through them sanctifying themselves, through the parents sanctifying themselves, they will draw down a holy soul for their child, which enables the light of the child's soul to shine brightly and allows the godly light to flow through their souls freely. And based on this, the Zohar tells us that parents should sanctify themselves, because it's through this holy garment that the divine light is able to be openly revealed in the soul of their child. And even if the soul of the child is a great soul, so you say, my son is Moses. Who cares what I do? If my son is Moses, he has the greatest soul. My son's the Alter Rebbe. My son's the next, who knows what. Who cares what I do? He's got a great soul on himself, on his own. It still needs the sanctification of the father. In other words, even when Hashem gifts a intensely spiritual, intensely lofty soul to a set of parents, that soul still needs the father to sanctify himself in order to bring down this holy garment, because that's the only way that the great light of the child's soul should be able to effectuate the body. Now that is all talking about the garment of the soul. So the garment, in short, the garment of the soul could be impacted by the parents. However, aval neshama atzma, but the soul itself, not necessarily so. Sometimes the soul of a very lofty person, of an intensely holy Jew, could come to be the son of somebody who's completely lowly. The classic example of that is Avram Avinu, Abraham. His father was Terach, the owner of the idol shop. As Rabbi Josh Gordon likes to say, he owned the franchise of Idols Are Us. And who's the son? Avram Avinu, right? So certainly the fact that Avram Avinu had that special soul is not credit to his father. So the bottom line is that the father or the parents together really can only affect the level of the garment, if the garment of the soul will be a refined garment, but not the essence of the soul itself. And that's why you see this disparity between parents and children, that the son could have a totally unrelated soul to the level of the parents. On the flip side, you have Chizkiyahu HaMelech, King Hezekiah, who was a very righteous king. And the whole story, he didn't want to die. And he didn't want to procreate because he knew he would have wicked children, and he was about to die. And ultimately, he decided that I think it was, I forget the name of the prophet who told him, it's not your business to make these decisions. You have to do your mitzvah. Hashem will do his part. And he agreed, and he lived much longer. And sure enough, he had a child who turned out to be wicked, right? So here you have a very righteous person whose son is very wicked. In other words, has a soul that's a very low level. So the soul itself is not impacted by the parents. The garments of the soul are impacted by the parents, because the soul itself is literally a piece of God above and has no relation to the behavior of humankind. And Hashem is the one exclusively who sends down a soul, saying this soul belongs in this body to these parents, and so on and so forth. Hashem has absolute control over that. As the Arizal writes all of this, the Likutei Torah, Parshas Vayera, you can see in the Likutei Torah of Parshas Vayera, Uvetame Mitzvahs, Parshas Bereshis, and in the Sefer Tame Mitzvahs of the first parsha of the Torah, in the mitzvah talking about being fruitful and multiplying. Over there, it talks about the various souls and the garments at greater length. So in short, since the soul is literally a piece of God above, what that means, as we said in the beginning of this chapter, it's understood that its placement in a particular body is completely up to God. And even the level of the soul that a person is given does not depend on the parents. Now, you might say, wait a second, the Zohar tells us that the parents need to sanctify themselves during intimacy, and that can cause a different rank of a soul. So he says, no, that's not the soul itself. It's talking about the spiritual garment of the soul, because every soul has a spiritual garment through which the soul operates in the body, and the level of that garment is established by the behavior of the parents. That the more sanctified they are, the more elevated they behave in their behavior, especially during intimacy, that causes a more elevated garment. But the soul itself, it's totally possible for Hashem to send a higher soul to be the child of somebody who's very, let's say, undeserving. So that concludes the second chapter. But let's just do a little summary of the entire chapter. So we started off by saying that the second soul that every Jew has, remember the first soul is the klipa soul, the animalistic soul. So the second soul that every Jew has is literally a piece of God above. And that's why when it says that God gave Adam the soul, it says that he blew it in. which blowing indicates that it's something that you do from your inside as opposed to speaking. And and that's why the Jewish people are called Yisrael Alu b'machshava, that we entered Hashem's thought, meaning as opposed to speech, which is more external, thought is something that's coming from a deeper place inside. And that's also why we're called Hashem's children, because just like we come from Hashem's thought, children also come from the mind of the Father. And so we come from God's mind. Now, lest you think that God and his mind are two separate things, that's absolutely false. And God and his wisdom, his mind, as we explained, is really all one and the same. Now, since we all come from God's essence, from God's mind, you might say there's no difference between one person and another. So he says, no, there are different ranks in neshamas, from one extreme to another. Some neshamas are called the head or the brain neshamas. Some are called the heel neshamas, the toenail neshamas. However, the root of all those souls does come from supernal wisdom, from God's wisdom. And the analogy he gives for this is from the formation of a child from the drop of the father's brain. That on the one hand, there's a lot of changes that happen because, you know, there's a whole body that's formed from that little drop. However, that only the differences in the various different body parts is in the formation of the body parts, in the quality of the body parts. However, at their very root, they're always connected to the brain. And even after the child's born, all of the limbs of the child are still connected to the child's brain. And so because the brain of the child comes from the father's child, really all the parts of the child's body are connected to the father's brain. And so the same is true when we're talking about different ranks of souls that go through all different sorts of processes of hishtalshelus, as we said. It goes from one level to another, descending down and down to the lowest levels of souls. However, at the very core, at the very root, at the very essence of each of these souls, no matter how much processes it goes through, it's still a portion of God above, literally. And then he says further that how do we stay connected to this root, where the root of our souls? So the way we stay connected is by connecting to the souls of the tzaddikim, the chachamim, the rebbes of every generation, which they are like the brain, the head of the body. And that gives vitality. It kind of pumps life into the souls of the rest of the body. And that's how we connect to the root of Hashem. And that's where the whole idea of attaching ourselves to a rebbe, to a leader of a generation, to the head souls of the generation comes from. Because when we do that, that's how we attach ourselves to the Shekhinah, which is the root of our soul. Now, since our neshama comes from God, it's understood that the placement of our soul is completely up to God. And even the level of our soul is not dependent on the parents. And even though the Zohar talks about the garment of the soul being dependent on the parents' behavior, that's only the garment. But the essence of the soul does come from Hashem above, literally, and Hashem places the soul wherever he places it. And that just further illustrates the fact that our souls are deeply, intrinsically connected to God above directly. So that is the conclusion of chapter 2. And next week, we're going to begin chapter 3, which talks about the 10 levels of the soul. These are often referred to as the garments of the soul that we kind of referenced here. Please join us again then. Thank you.